Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is the Apostate Prophet. Azealia Banks just enraged a lot of people after she was asked whether she is a Zionist or whether she supports Palestine. She replied, "I am a Zionist." The tweet went viral, but she continued with how she would never support something Islamic or Palestinian. And then she made more tweets, including one that directly talked about slavery by Arabs and by Muslims. She made very Islamophobic posts. Here is the issue. She is totally right. I used to listen to her music. Azealia Banks is not only right, she hasn't even said enough. Yes, slavery did exist, and also, by the way, still does exist in different forms in the Muslim and Arab world. But the reality is worse. We talk a lot about transatlantic slavery. We've seen so many movies where slavery in America was featured and criticized. But the Arab slave trade, or the Muslim slave trade, was much bigger and much worse. The West admits and apologizes for their part in slavery. The Muslim world cuts it up, buries it, and never talks about it again, just as they did to their slaves. The slave trade by Arabs and Muslims, of sub-Saharan Africans and others, started long before the transatlantic slave trade, ended long after the transatlantic slave trade, and is still partly going on. It started with the rise of Islam in the 7th century, although the Arab slave trade probably precedes Islam on a smaller scale, considering that we have records of black slaves being used in Arabia prior to the emergence of Islam. And the abolition of slavery in the Muslim world only came about in the 19th century, continued in the 20th century, and is still going on. In Mauritania,
What are you doing?
slavery...
This is my script.
Well, someone's got to read it.
I'll read it. I wrote this, man.
In Mauritania, slavery was only abolished in the 1980s and only criminalized in 2007, less than 20 years ago. It is still ongoing, unofficially, underground, or through corruption. In Libya, it is still partly going on. There are reports of slaves being sold in markets. In the Gulf countries, there is still a form of slavery going on, migrants being brought in and then bound to a certain employer for their entire stay. And the employer then basically has the migrant in his grips and does with them whatever he wants. Compare the scale and the length of the Arab slave trade to the transatlantic slave trade. But for some reason, we pay attention to one, but never the other. In places like East Africa, slavery was also much worse, significantly worse than slavery in North America. For example, on the eastern coast of Africa, in Zanzibar, the most brutal forms of slavery are recorded. Under Arab Muslim leadership, black sub-Saharan Africans were enslaved, given brutal punishments, tortured, mutilated, used as sex slaves, castrated, abused, killed, put on death marches, and so on. In comparison to the slave trade in America, the slaves in East Africa at the hands of Arab Muslims were given little to no chance of survival, no chance of reproduction, no chance to have their own families. They were used as sex slaves on a very large scale. According to estimates, 50% of the slaves in East Africa, captured from deep within the interior, died before they even reached the coast, where they would be traded or held. The Arab or Islamic slave trade spanned across East Africa, North Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, the Ottoman Empire, Central Asia, and even reached India. The slaves were mostly black Africans, millions of them, but also Europeans, Slavs, Hindus, and other non-Muslim groups. It is also known that, for example, Europeans were captured through coastal raids by Muslim pirates and then brought as slaves to the Muslim world. These slaves were very valuable, especially the women, for sexual slavery, of course. The male slaves, captured in Africa, were usually castrated, which meant their genitals were fully removed. They were used as eunuchs in palaces and harems by wealthy owners. Castration was extremely dangerous. It was done with no anesthetics, no antiseptics. Most of the boys didn't survive castration. Thinking about it, this was bad for business for the slave traders, but it was worth it because this is what Muslim owners generally wanted. They wanted castrated slaves because they didn't want their slaves to be a threat to their own women, meaning their wives, their concubines, or others, which is why they preferred castrated slaves. So it was better for the slave traders to risk killing the slaves, but castrate them and then sell highly valued slaves with guarantees to wealthy owners in the Arab Muslim world. Female slaves were usually used for sexual exploitation. They were sold into harems across the Middle East and North Africa. Many were trafficked as children. The thing with female slaves is that while male slaves were also evidently used for sex, with female slaves they were, of course, much more desirable for sex slavery. And it was, and still is, also Islamically permitted to have sex with the female slaves that you own. According to Islam, if you are in possession of a female slave, you are allowed to have sex with her. And this is not considered adultery, nor is it a violation. Her consent does not matter here. You own her. She is your property in Islam. So you can do with her whatever you want. And this is not just history, it is reported to still be happening today. There are advocates of Islam, Muslim apologists and others that we have interacted with, who have also explicitly stated that they would bring this back in the future. All of this is not a surprise because Muhammad himself, the so-called Prophet Muhammad, owned slaves, according to reports, mostly black slaves. He also owned female slaves that he used as concubines for his sexual desires. Some of those slaves he liked so much that he actually married them upon captivity or later on, which is also another messed up point. One of the female slaves that he had, he freed under the condition that she marries him. So the price of her freedom was marriage. Imagine that. He basically coerced her into marrying him because she could either remain a slave or she could be a free human and be his wife. This is the wonderfully, perfectly moral Muhammad, guided by Allah. Muhammad also engaged in raids and in battles and wars and captured his non-Muslim opponents, including taking the women as concubines and raping them. According to multiple reports which are deemed authoritative and authentic in Islamic tradition, his followers came up to him and asked him about having sex with slaves, which he allowed. In some instances, we have reports such as this one where his loyal follower tells him, "Give me a slave girl," upon which Muhammad says, "Go and take one." So this is very much Islamic. Another very important and interesting detail here is that there is a text called Muqaddimah, very, very famous in Islamic history, written by Islamic scholar and historian Ibn Khaldun in the 14th century. He writes in his book the following: "Therefore, the Negro nations are as a rule submissive to slavery, because Negroes have little that is essentially human and have attributes that are quite similar to those of dumb animals." This gives us all the insight into what Muslims and Arabs thought about black people and slaves in the 14th century. But this wasn't just limited to the 14th century. It is widely known in the Muslim world, in the Arab Muslim world specifically, that the word abid, which means slave, is still widely used as a slur for black people. They will still call a black person abid or abed, jokingly or colloquially, without even meaning to call them a slave. But this is just a word that has come to be used for black people. It often doesn't even matter whether the black person is a Muslim or a non-Muslim. Sometimes it is used as an endearing word, like, "Oh, look at this Abid, look at this cute Abid, he's a Muslim," and so on. So black people are looked down upon in the Muslim world, still as lesser or pathetic beings. So long story short, Azealia Banks, whether you agree with her or not, is spot on when it comes to this topic. It is indeed insane for black people to support Islam or Islamic entities or Islamist organizations like Hamas or Islamic movements or Pan-Arabism, considering that Arab colonization, Arab imperialism, and Arab slavery was worse for black Africans than other types of slavery or other types of colonization and imperialism. Now, although I wouldn't really put it the way she put it, Arabs were indeed colonizers too. But hey, let's not talk about this. Let's just focus on white people. It's much easier, much more popular. Who cares about all the bad stuff that Muslims did? They don't know any better. Thanks for watching. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe and to share this video, and I will be back soon. Stay away from Islam, or you will be humiliated by the people of Al-Zud.